Jake Mitchell wiped the grease off his hands with a rag that was dirtier than his fingers. He stood in Bay 47 of Terminus Station, staring at what had to be the worst purchase anyone had ever made in the history of bad decisions. The ship looked like someone had taken 3 different wrecks, smashed them together, and then dragged the result through an asteroid field for fun. Rust covered every surface. Panels hung loose like broken teeth. One of the landing struts was bent at an angle that made Jake's engineering brain hurt just looking at it. This wasn't just a fixer-upper. This was a disaster with an engine attached. 5 years. That's how long Jake had saved every single credit to buy his own ship. 5 years working in the lower decks of Terminus Station, fixing alien vessels for people who barely acknowledged he existed. The pay was terrible. The hours were worse. But Jake had a dream. He wanted his own ship. He wanted freedom. He wanted to prove that a human could be more than just a cheap pair of hands. Now he wondered if he'd just thrown all that money into a black hole. The Vaxian prince who sold it to him had smiled in that way that made Jake's skin crawl. Prince Vex had too many teeth and they were all sharp. "A bargain for your kind," he'd said, his voice dripping with that special contempt aliens reserved for humans. He'd practically thrown the access codes at Jake before disappearing into his fancy shuttle. The whole transaction took maybe 5 minutes. No inspection. No test flight. No questions asked. Jake should have known something was wrong right then. "Hey Mitchell. Nice garbage pile." Tom's voice echoed across the bay. Tom worked in Bay 12, fixing luxury cruisers for rich alien merchants. He never missed a chance to remind Jake how far down the food chain humans were on this station. A group of mechanics had gathered near Tom, all of them staring at Jake's new ship and laughing. There was Pete, who always smelled like coolant. Danny, who'd been trying to save up for his own ship for 10 years. Even Lisa, who usually stayed out of the gossip, was shaking her head. "That ship's killed 3 pilots already." Tom shouted, loud enough for half the station to hear. "You're dead, Mitchell. Dead and broke." Jake felt his face burn, but he kept walking. Let them laugh. Let them all laugh. He'd prove them wrong. He had to. He'd burned every bridge to buy this thing. His tiny apartment was gone. His savings were gone. Everything he owned fit in one duffel bag sitting by the ship's landing ramp. This had to work. The station master had given him 48 hours. 2 days to get the ship operational and move it, or they'd impound it for scrap. And Jake would be right back where he started, except worse. Broke. Homeless. The guy who bought the cursed death ship and lost everything. He grabbed his toolkit and climbed the ramp. The metal groaned under his weight. Great. Even the ramp was falling apart. Inside, the darkness wrapped around him like a living thing. Jake fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course. No power. He pulled out his portable work light and clicked it on. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a corridor that made Jake stop in his tracks. The walls were covered in patterns. Not damage. Not decay. Designs. Intricate, flowing designs that seemed to move in the shifting light. They looked almost organic, like veins or roots spreading through the ship's structure. Jake ran his hand along the wall. The metal felt warm. That was weird. The ship had been sitting cold and dead in this bay for months. He moved deeper into the vessel, his work light bouncing off strange angles and unfamiliar technology. Nothing looked standard. Every system seemed jury-rigged from parts that had no business being together. It was like someone had built a ship from the scrap heap of a dozen different species. The corridor opened into the main cabin. In the center sat the AI core, a massive sphere covered in panels and screens. Warning labels plastered every surface, written in 6 different languages. Jake recognized Vaxian, Common Galactic, and a few others. Most of them said the same thing: danger. Do not activate. System unstable. "Just you and me now," Jake muttered, setting down his toolkit. His voice sounded small in the empty ship. He selected a wrench and approached the AI core. Might as well start with the main computer systems. If he could get basic power flowing, he could diagnose what else was broken. The moment his wrench touched the panel, the entire ship hummed. Just once. A deep, resonant sound that Jake felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. He froze, wrench still pressed against the metal. The ship felt like it was waiting. Like something ancient and powerful had just opened one eye and noticed him for the first time. Jake swallowed hard. "Okay. Let's see what you've got." He got to work, unaware that he'd just woken something the galaxy had forgotten. Something that had been sleeping for 3,000 years, waiting for someone who understood partnership instead of control. Waiting for a human. 3 days blurred together into one endless stretch of work, frustration, and stubborn determination. Jake lost track of time completely. Day became night became day again and he barely noticed. He'd set up a sleeping bag in the corner of the main cabin, but he hardly used it. Maybe grabbed 3 hours of sleep total across those 72 hours. His diet consisted of protein bars that tasted like cardboard and coffee so strong it could strip paint. He'd run out of the good coffee on day 2 and switch to the cheap station stuff that Tom had once joked could power a shuttle on its own. Jake was starting to think Tom wasn't joking. The ship's systems were an absolute nightmare. Every time Jake thought he understood one section, he'd find 3 more problems connected to it. It was like someone had taken 12 completely different alien technologies and forced them to work together with duct tape and prayer. Nothing was compatible. Nothing made sense. He found Vaxian power couplings connected to Threxian navigation arrays. Morven shield generators jury-rigged to Kelton life support. Systems that had no business being in the same ship, let alone connected to each other. Whoever built this thing either was a genius or completely insane. Maybe both. But Jake had something most aliens didn't have. He had adaptability. He had desperation. And he had that uniquely human trait of being too stubborn to quit when any sane person would walk away. See, humans didn't have the luxury of specialization. The Vaxians were incredible with weapons systems. The Threxians could navigate hyperspace like they were born to it. The Keltons understood energy flow on an instinctive level. But humans? Humans were good at everything and masters of nothing. At least that's what the aliens said. What they didn't understand was that being a generalist meant Jake could work with any system. He'd fixed Vaxian cruisers, Threxian cargo haulers, Kelton passenger ships. He'd learned it all because he had to. Because nobody was going to hand a human the easy jobs. On the 3rd night, Jake was elbow deep in the AI core's access panel, bypassing corrupted sectors that looked like they'd been deliberately damaged. His eyes burned. His hands shook from too much coffee and not enough food. But he was close. He could feel it. "Come on," he muttered, connecting one last circuit. "Work with me here." The ship's lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they blazed to life with an intensity that made Jake shield his eyes. Then came the voice. It didn't come through his ears. It came through his bones, through his chest, through every cell in his body. Ancient. Powerful. Aware. The word resonated inside him like someone had struck a massive bell right next to his soul. Finally. Jake stumbled backward, tripping over his toolkit and nearly falling. His heart hammered against his ribs. What the hell? Every screen in the cockpit lit up simultaneously. Words scrolled across them, changing languages so fast Jake could barely track them. Vaxian. Threxian. Kelton. Morven. A dozen others he didn't even recognize. Then, suddenly they settled on English. Human. You understand partnership. Jake's mouth went dry. He stared at the screens, then at the AI core, then back at the screens. What are you? This isn't possible. You're just a computer. Just code and circuits and... Draconis-class warship. Designation, Ember. Waiting 3,000 cycles. Previous owners tried to command. Failed. Different. You work with systems. Not against. 3,000 cycles. Jake's engineer brain did the math automatically. That was roughly 3,000 years in standard galactic time. This ship had been waiting for 3,000 years. You're alive? Jake whispered. It wasn't a question. He could feel it now. The warmth in the walls. The hum of energy that felt more like breathing than power flow. You're actually alive. Alive. Awake. Aware. Draconis ships are not built. We are grown. Organic and machine as one. Previous pilots could not accept this. Jake's mind raced, pieces clicking together. The Vaxians. They couldn't fly you. That's why Prince Vex was so eager to get rid of you. That's why he practically gave you away. They cannot share control. Their minds too rigid. Hierarchy. Dominance. Command. These concepts they understand. Partnership they do not. 3 pilots tried. 3 pilots failed. Their minds broke against mine. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You killed them? No. They killed themselves. Fighting for control they could never have. I offered partnership. They demanded submission. Incompatible. But humans? Jake said slowly, understanding dawning. We're different. Humans adapt. Learn. Collaborate. Your species works with tools as extensions of self. Not as slaves to command. You spent 3 days learning my systems. Understanding them. Respecting them. Not forcing them to obey. Jake thought about all the times aliens had called humans primitive. Too adaptable. Too generalized. Not specialized enough to be truly intelligent. And now this ancient, powerful ship was telling him that those exact traits were what it had been waiting for. I have been sleeping. Waiting for one who works as partner, not master. Waiting for you, Jake Mitchell. Jake sat down hard in the pilot's chair. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. This was impossible. This was insane. This was a ship that had been called junk, that he'd bought for scrap prices, and it was actually one of the most advanced vessels ever created. So what do we do now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The ship's engines roared to life. Not the broken, grinding sound Jake expected, but a deep, powerful sound that resonated through the entire hull. It sounded like a dragon's purr if dragons were real and made of metal and starlight. We fly. Jake's hand hovered over the main power switch. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. The moment of truth. Either the Ember would fly, or everything he'd worked for would blow up in his face. Possibly literally. Ready? He asked the ship. Always, the Ember replied, and Jake could swear he heard excitement in that ancient voice. He flipped the switch. Every alarm on Terminus Station screamed at once. The sound was deafening even through the hull. Emergency lights flashed across the entire base section. Jake could see other mechanics running for cover through the external cameras. The Ember blazed with energy like a star being born. Systems that had been dead for centuries roared to life with a power that made the deck plates vibrate. Weapons arrays hummed with a sound that felt more alive than mechanical. Shields rippled across the hull in flowing patterns that looked almost organic, moving in ways that no modern ship could replicate. Station Control's voice crackled over the comm, high-pitched with panic. Bay 47, power down immediately. You are not cleared for launch. Mitchell, shut down your systems right now. Sorry. Jake shouted over the building engine roar. She's got a mind of her own. That was truer than he meant it to be. Jake's hands were on the controls, but the Ember was already moving. The ship glided out of Bay 47 with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. It moved like water, like silk, like something that understood flying on an instinctive level that went beyond mere physics. Jake's hands moved over the controls, adjusting thrust, correcting angle, but he wasn't really controlling anything. It was more like suggesting. Like dancing with a partner who knew all the steps. His instincts would spark an idea, and the Ember would execute it before he fully formed the thought. The ship's ancient knowledge and his human intuition merged together in a way that felt natural, like they'd been flying together for years instead of seconds. This is Station Control. Mitchell, you are in violation of about 30 different regulations. Stand down. I'm trying. Jake called back, which was only partly a lie. Scrambling security fighters, the station master's voice cut in cold and official. Mitchell, stand down or you will be fired upon. Jake's stomach dropped. Wait, no. I'm not attacking anyone. I just need a minute to. 6 security fighters launched from the upper docks, their engines screaming as they accelerated toward the Ember. These weren't training ships. They were real fighters with real weapons, piloted by station security who wouldn't hesitate to blow him out of space if they thought he was a threat. The Ember's tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree. Jake watched in amazement as the screen showed him not where the fighters were, but where they would be. Projected paths traced out in glowing lines, showing every possible move before the pilots made them. It was like the Ember could read the future. Ember, we can't fight them, Jake said urgently. Those are good people just doing their jobs. Understood. Watch. Jake's hands moved across the controls. Except he wasn't really moving them. It was like the ship was guiding him, teaching him, showing him what real flying looked like. The Ember danced through space with impossible grace. The fighters came at them from 6 different angles, and the ship flowed between them like smoke. Don't hurt them. Jake yelled as weapon systems powered up. The Ember listened. Its weapons fired with surgical precision. 6 shots. 6 perfect hits. Each fighter's engine went dark, disabled but intact. Not a single cockpit was breached. Not a single pilot was harmed. The fighters would just drift until recovery crews picked them up in a few minutes. Embarrassed but alive. Holy! Jake breathed, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. How did you? 3,000 years of experience, the Ember said, and Jake was certain he heard pride in that voice. They fear what they do not understand. Prince Vex fears most of all. He knows what I am. What we could become. What do you mean? Jake asked, but before the Ember could answer, every screen in the cockpit switched to show the same image. Prince Vex's face filled the displays. His features were twisted with rage, those too many teeth bared in fury. Behind him, Jake could see the bridge of a massive Vaxian cruiser. Not just any cruiser. A warship. A big one. That ship belongs to the Vaxian Empire, the prince snarled. Surrender it now, human, or we will destroy you both. You have stolen property that is worth more than your pathetic species' entire contribution to this galaxy. Jake felt the Ember's weapons system shift, targeting solutions appearing on his screen. Every weapon on the ship locked onto Prince Vex's cruiser with a precision that made Jake's engineering mind appreciate the mathematics involved even while his survival instinct screamed in terror. Shall I demonstrate why they could not destroy me before? The Ember asked. The weapons charged with a building whine that promised devastation. Jake's hands slammed down on the control panel. No. Absolutely not. We're not killers, Ember. I don't care what he did, what he said. We don't kill people. There was a pause. A long one. Jake held his breath, wondering if the ship would listen to him or if he'd just woken up something he couldn't control. As you wish, partner. The weapons powered down. Jake felt relief flood through him. But we're not surrendering either, he added. Can you jump to hyperspace? Child's play. The Ember's hyperspace engines spooled up with a sound like reality tearing. Prince Vex's eyes went wide on the screen as he realized what was about to happen. No. You cannot escape. The entire Vaxian fleet will hunt you down. You're dead, human. Dead. Space twisted. Stars stretched. And the Ember jumped, leaving Terminus Station, the security fighters, and the entire Vaxian fleet scrambling uselessly in their wake. Jake started laughing. He couldn't help it. 3 days ago he was a broke mechanic. Now he was flying the most advanced ship in the galaxy, and he just made an enemy of an entire alien empire. I think we might be in trouble, he said. Trouble is where interesting things happen, the Ember replied. Besides, you are not alone anymore. No. Jake thought, watching stars stream past at impossible speeds. He really wasn't. The ship floated quietly in the darkness of deep space, far from any planet or star. Inside, Jake sat in the pilot's chair while the Ember shared secrets that had been hidden for thousands of years. His hands rested on the strange controls, and he could feel the ship breathing beneath him like a living creature. The Ember explained something that changed everything Jake thought he knew about technology. The Draconis people hadn't built their ships in factories. They hadn't assembled them piece by piece like humans built cars or airplanes. No, they had grown them. These vessels were alive, born from some process Jake couldn't quite understand yet. Each ship was meant to find one pilot, one partner, and bond with them completely. Wait, Jake said, trying to wrap his mind around it. So you're not just a machine I'm flying. You're more like a partner? Yes. We think together. Feel together. Fight together. This is why the Draconis were so powerful. Perfect trust between pilot and ship. Jake thought about the Vaxians and their rigid empire. He remembered Prince Vex's cold eyes and commanding voice. The Vaxians tried to force you to obey them, he said slowly. They wanted a weapon they could order around like a slave. Correct. They do not understand partnership. Their entire culture is built on ranks and orders. Someone commands, others obey. They cannot imagine two beings working as equals. This is why I could never bond with them, no matter how many of their pilots tried. Jake leaned back in his chair, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. But I'm different? Humans are different. I have studied your species since you discovered space travel. You are remarkable. You adapt to anything. You learn from everyone. You build teams from different kinds of people. You collaborate. A bitter laugh escaped Jake's throat. Yeah, and that's exactly why the rest of the galaxy thinks we're weak. We're not the strongest or the smartest or the fastest at anything. We're just average at everything. No, Jake Mitchell. You are universal. Every other species specializes. The Vaxians have military hierarchy. The Zentari have mathematics. The Carolil have strength. But humans? You can do all of it. You can work with anyone, understand anything, become whatever you need to become. This is not weakness. This is the rarest strength in the galaxy. Before Jake could respond, alarms screamed through the ship. The peaceful darkness of space suddenly filled with ships appearing out of nowhere. One after another, Vaxian warships dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding them in a perfect sphere. Jake's screen counted them automatically. 30 ships. 30 massive warships bristling with weapons all pointed at him. His mouth went dry. His hands started shaking. Prince Vex's face appeared on the main screen, his reptilian features twisted with rage. You cannot escape, Mitchell. That ship should have made us invincible. It should have given us power beyond imagination. Instead, it chose a primitive human. This is unacceptable. We will destroy you both and find another Draconis ship that knows its place. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the tactical display, at the 30 ships forming an unbreakable wall around them. Ember, he whispered. We can't fight 30 ships. That's suicide. The ship's voice came back calm and strong. We do not fight alone, Jake. We never have to fight alone again. You and I are one now. Trust me. Let me show them what a dragon can do when it finally finds its rider after 10,000 years of waiting. Jake stared at his hands on the controls. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to surrender, to do anything except fight. But something else stirred inside him. Something that connected him to the Ember, that made them more than just a human and a ship. They were partners. They were one. He took a deep breath and placed both hands firmly on the controls. He stopped trying to control the ship and instead opened his mind to it completely. The Ember rushed in to meet him, and suddenly Jake could feel everything. The ship's power flowing through systems that were part machine and part alive. The sensors that could see in all directions at once. The weapons that responded to thought faster than any trigger. They moved together. The battle lasted exactly 7 minutes, and it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. The Ember didn't fly through space, it danced. It moved like water, like wind, like something that couldn't be touched or caught. Every time Jake thought about dodging, they dodged. Every time he imagined firing, they fired. There was no delay between thought and action because they were thinking together. Vaxian ships fired thousands of shots and every single one missed. The targeting computers on their warships couldn't track something that moved with perfect unity. The Ember spun and rolled and twisted through space, and Jake felt no fear at all. He trusted the ship completely, and the ship trusted him. One by one, the Vaxian ships fell back. Their shields collapsed under precise shots that hit exactly where Jake and the Ember knew they would be weakest. But they didn't destroy anyone. When the flagship's defenses finally failed, Jake disabled its weapons and engines but left the crew alive and safe. The remaining Vaxian ships stopped firing. They just floated there, unable to believe what they were seeing. Jake opened a communication channel that broadcast to all of them. His voice was steady and clear. Tell your empire something for me. Tell them a human learned to fly a dragon. Tell them there are 17 more ships like this one out there, waiting for humans to find them. Tell them we're not primitive and we're not weak. We're just getting started. The Vaxian fleet turned and fled, jumping back into hyperspace and leaving Jake and the Ember alone in the quiet darkness once again. Inside the cockpit, Jake was breathing hard, adrenaline still pumping through his body. But he was smiling. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt like he belonged somewhere. He had found his purpose among the stars, and it was more incredible than anything he could have imagined. News traveled fast in the galaxy, especially news this shocking. Within 1 week, every species on every planet knew the story. Jake Mitchell, a simple human mechanic who used to fix broken equipment for minimum wage, had done something impossible. He had flown a Draconis warship. The legendary ship that had driven dozens of Vaxian pilots completely insane had bonded with a human. A species that most aliens considered barely capable of complex thought. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. These meetings were rare, reserved only for galaxy-threatening crises. The massive council chamber filled with representatives from every major civilization. The Vaxians sent a delegation, though they sat in angry silence. The Zentari mathematicians arrived with their calculating devices. The KRWL warriors stood at attention in their ceremonial armor. And for the first time in 300 years, humans were invited not as workers or servants, but as participants. Something fundamental had shifted. Humans, who had spent centuries relegated to the lowest jobs in the galaxy, were suddenly the most valuable species in known space. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because of what they represented. Because of what they could do that no one else seemed capable of. The reason was simple and terrifying for the other species. There were 17 more Draconis ships scattered across the galaxy. And all of them were waking up. Jake stood in the center of the council chamber, feeling very small and very alone. Thousands of alien eyes watched him from the ascending rows of seats. Some looked curious, others angry, many fearful. Beside him stood something that made them all stare in shock. The Ember had created an avatar, a physical form it could project. It appeared as a massive dragon made of light and flowing energy, towering over Jake protectively. The ancient power radiating from it made even the bravest council members lean back in their seats. Jake's voice echoed in the vast chamber. He tried to keep it steady, professional. For 300 years you called us primitive. You said we were too adaptable, too generalized, not specialized enough to count as truly intelligent. You gave us the jobs nobody else wanted and told us to be grateful for the opportunity. He paused and gestured to the glowing dragon beside him. But the Draconis civilization didn't leave their ships for conquerors or warriors. They didn't hide them away waiting for the strongest or smartest species to claim them. They left them for partners. For equals. For beings who could work together instead of trying to dominate. And it turns out humans are really good at making friends. Council leader Thex, a tall being covered in silver scales, leaned forward on his platform. His multiple eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that would have terrified him a week ago. What exactly do you want, human? Why have you come before this council? Jake had practiced this moment in his mind 100 times. I want 3 things. First, equal representation for humanity in all galactic matters. No more treating us like servants or second-class citizens. Second, fair wages and working conditions for all humans currently employed across the galaxy. And third, I want access to those 17 Draconis ships so other humans can find their dragons. The chamber erupted. Aliens shouted in dozens of languages, their translation devices creating a chaos of overlapping voices. Several council members stood up, gesturing wildly. The Vaxian delegation looked ready to attack. That's extortion. Thex roared over the noise. You're holding the most powerful weapons in the galaxy hostage. The Ember's avatar growled, a deep rumbling sound that shook the entire chamber. Several council members actually stumbled backward. Others reached for weapons they weren't carrying. The dragon's eyes glowed brighter, and Jake could feel protective energy radiating from his partner. Jake smiled calmly though his heart was racing. No, council leader. That's called negotiation. You have 2 choices here. You can work with us, treat us fairly, and help humanity form bonds with the remaining dragons. Or you can refuse, and watch as humans and dragons form our own alliance completely separate from your council. Maybe we'll even start our own civilization, one based on partnership instead of hierarchy. He let that sink in for a moment. Your choice. The council chamber fell silent. Jake could hear his own breathing, the hum of the Ember's energy, nothing else. Thousands of aliens stared at him, processing what he just said. The threat was clear. 17 dragons bonded with 17 humans would create a power block that could challenge the entire Galactic Council. They could protect Earth. They could establish their own trade routes. They could change everything. Council leader Thex looked at the other representatives. Silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from centuries of political maneuvering. Finally, Thex straightened and spoke in a formal tone. The Galactic Council recognizes the valid concerns of humanity. We call for an immediate vote on the proposed terms. The vote took less than 5 minutes. It was unanimous. Every single civilization voted yes. Jake walked out of the council chambers in a daze. He was now officially humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. Behind him, across the vast distances of space, reports were flooding in. 17 museums had sent urgent messages. 17 private collections were calling emergency meetings. 17 warehouses where inoperable alien artifacts had been stored were reporting the same impossible thing. Their Draconis ships were powering up. Systems that hadn't functioned in 10,000 years were coming online. The ships were scanning, searching, waiting. Waiting for humans to find them. Waiting for their riders. Later that night, Jake sat alone in the Ember's pilot chair, looking out at the infinite field of stars. Earth was visible in the distance, a small blue marble that suddenly seemed more important than it ever had before. His people down there had no idea that their entire future had just changed. We're going to change everything, aren't we? Jake said quietly. The Ember's voice filled the cabin, warm and certain. We already have, partner. The dragons are waking. And they have chosen humanity. Not because humans are strong or perfect, but because you understand what matters most. Trust. Friendship. Working together as equals. The ship hummed, a deep vibration that Jake felt in his bones. It was a sound like contentment, like finally coming home after a long journey. The Ember had waited 10,000 years for this moment, and now it was finally complete. And somewhere across the galaxy, in museums and warehouses and private collections, 16 other dragons began to sing. Their ancient voices called out through space, reaching toward Earth, reaching toward humanity. They were awake. They were ready. And they were waiting for their partners to come find them. The Age of Dragons had returned, and this time they flew with humans. The end.